small but mighty and indefatigable, that's much better. Indefatigable Wits team. Wolf Kalawa, Paolo Brandini, Caterina Zibrova, William Mpofu, Kudzai Valioro is somewhere here, Udo Zite, who was unfortunately not able to join us, and Ramela Modise, who've all been working tirelessly in the last few weeks to get the last bits together. Also, huge thanks to Didier Mapoto from the Saatchi Chair for Digital Humanities, who's been helping us out with our comms, and Najiba Deshmukh from Wiser and the Innovation Foundation for Democracy, who's been helping in various other ways, including advice on how to actually do a conference. Also to thank our funders. The Centre itself is largely funded by the chair, so the NRF and the National Research Foundation, Department of Science and Technology are the main funders for this event. We've also received generous additional support from the Faculty of Humanities Research and Innovation Committee, from the Wits University Research Office, and from the Innovation Foundation for Democracy. Thanks as well to Eugenio Gagliardon from the Chair in Digital Humanities, the Saatchi Chair in Digital Humanities, who's been offering us support and guidance in other ways, for instance, putting together a complicated and interesting conference program. Thank you to the School of Social Sciences and to our head of school, Lorena Nunez Carrasco. The school has been very supportive of the kind of work that WiCDS is doing, which is really invaluable when you are trying to have complicated conversations and push boundaries in multiple ways. And then, of course, thank you so much primarily to all of our speakers, some of whom have come from very close by and some of whom have come from really far away to join this conversation. So, to give you a sense of the Wits Center for Diversity Studies, we are a teaching and research center based here at Wits. WiCDS was set up by my predecessor, Melissa Stain, who was also the original holder of the Saatchi Chair that I've inherited. Melissa is a sociologist who works very intensely on issues of race. Particularly, she has an interest in whiteness, which is how I got to know her, because I also write about white people a lot. She's also a sociologist with a keen eye for praxis. So one of the things that I think WiCDS does that is important is we have an emphasis on taking scholarly research outside of the academy, on engaging with NGOs, with civil society, with community groups, with policymakers, with trying to see how these large conversations can actually be applicable outside the sometimes inaccessible confines of the ivory tower, particularly inaccessible in the context of Wits, which, as some of you probably found out this morning, can be really, really difficult to physically get onto, which has its own set of consequences for how knowledge is spread. Within WiCDS, we take the approach that diversity, what we mean by diversity, we're basically talking about difference, social difference, political difference, physical difference, differences of gender, race, sexuality, ability. Those are our primary foci. Looking at them and saying that diversity can be strength. That more diverse institutions, societies, communities, groups are actually more creative, more resilient, more flexible, more capable of dealing with the challenges of contemporary life. And so we aim at supporting the potential of capacity building in diverse societies like South Africa's. We're interested in social, political, and technological progress that benefits everybody, not just specific groups, like, for example, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who deny the reality of climate change while aggressively investing in longevity, which makes you wonder where these people think they're going to live, if they manage to live for that long. The idea for this year's conference of Extremist Mythologies came out of the specific conditions of 2025. As we are all very, very aware, difference and diversity seem at the moment to be under particularly virulent attack. In the last few decades, it was easy to imagine, at least in wealthier countries in and aligned to the global north, that gender equality, anti-racism, support for different kinds of abilities, etc., have been becoming the norm. Obviously, the picture has been very different in different places, but there has been a global sense of a progressive, forward shift that benefits a lot of different kinds of people. In recent years, however, it's become clear that this post-war liberal fiction of the inherent goodness of progress and growth is collapsing around our ears. Assaults on queer and transgender people, on reproductive rights, on migrants,
on the very idea that everyone has the right to try and live a better life. Trump, of course, is the poster boy for this kind of movement, but he is a symptom and not a cause, which I think is evinced very clearly by the fact that so many of the people in this conference are talking about things other than what is happening in the US. The US is not the only place where we need to think about dangerous extremist mythologies, although it may be the loudest at the moment. The aim of the next 3 days is to think about what we have decided to call extremist mythologies. We want to ask not only why these kinds of violent populist exclusions are becoming so much louder and more common, but also how this is happening. And when I say how, I'm not talking only about, Elon Musk has bought Twitter and information is spreading in different ways. I'm talking also about paying close attention to narrative, to symbolism and to discourse, to processes and stories that emerge organically or are pushed and manipulated by bad actors with different kinds of influence. So for instance, we can look at what's currently happening in Palestine, which I think is the flashpoint situation of our age, as a paradigmatic example of extremist mythologies. Now, while there is a lot of important internal resistance within Israel, we've all seen footage of young Israelis burning their draft cards, statistics still suggest that the majority of Jewish Israelis actively support the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, even in the face of increasing international outrage. Now, why is this happening? We can't simply say that Israelis are monsters. They're not human. They're not like us. They just simply have no ethics. In order to understand why this is happening, we need to look at the mythologies that underpin their society. We need to look at the weaponization of the Nazi genocide. We need to look at the powerful idea that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. We need to consider how post-war Jews were told that people who were killed in concentration camps were simply lambs to the slaughter. What do those stories mean? How do they build a particular kind of society? Similarly, in South Africa, if we want to understand why African foreigners are the target for so much violent rage, we need to actually look at what groups like Operation Tudula say, which another panelist will be speaking about later. We need to think about how they operationalize the legitimate anxieties of living in a precarious society. If we simply dismiss South Africans as violent, hateful, xenophobic monsters, we'll never really learn anything real about how these kinds of hatred spread, what consequences they have, and how we might counter them. So these are important, even intimidating questions, and I'm so grateful that we have an incredible group of thinkers here to help us move them through the next 3 days. Thank you all again so much for joining us, and I will hand over to my colleague, Paola Prandini.
Thank you, Nikki. Welcome again, everyone. It's great to have you here with us. I just wanted to share some administrative information with you. Please, whoever is joining us for panels or even the speakers, in case you have presentations, bring them to us here 15 minutes before so that we can set everything up in advance. If you don't know, restrooms are that side close to the atrium where catering is being served. We also ask you to keep your name tags with you during the whole event, because this is the access for you to have catering during the conference. We also have here sign language interpreters. In case you need some assistance, please come to this side for translations. Water is being served here on the left in the reception of the Rad Center, so feel free and welcome to get water as much as you need. We have here in this room 2 exits, and we also have medical aid in case anybody needs. And if it is the case, please let us know, not only us that are here, but also the volunteers that are wearing WiCDS t-shirts. And the program is only online. That's why we have the QR code here available. For sustainability, we thought that this would be the best option than printing the programs out. So yeah, you can access whenever you need. And in case you have any other additional needs, please come and talk to us, and we'll be happy to assist you. And we wish you all have a great conference, and that's why we work it so much, and I'm glad we are here now to have this great time and enjoy that. Thank you so much. So now I'm giving the mic to William. William Mpofu, this is your turn.
Thank you so much, colleagues, and yeah, welcome. Thanks, Prof, for starting us up like that. My task today is very interesting. Somehow I've always known that one day I'll grow old enough to be able to introduce Achille Mbembe to an audience. So it's something that was always going to happen. But then there's a paradox. How does one introduce Mbembe? Because he doesn't need introduction. To introduce him might be to edit out a lot of details. Because I think to sufficiently and properly introduce a figure of thought like Prof Achille Mbembe needs a keynote address on its own, of which this conference does not afford the time, does not afford the place to do that. So, Prof, only next time. Today I'm not going to introduce you, but I'm going to talk about the idea of introducing you. I think that will help. Right. Exactly what is here? There are so many epistemic allegations about Mbembe. Polymath, historian, philosopher, and all other descriptions of the life of thought that Mbembe has embodied. There's something I've tried to do and failed, which is to flesh out the idea of, the decolonial idea of undisciplinarity. What is it like to think within and outside the disciplines as they have been structured, as they have been imposed on us? I think Mbembe has sort of, in practice, illustrated disciplinary border crossing, undisciplinarity, if I can put it in that way. In my hand, I have this book titled Brutalism. If I remember well, I think this is an English translation from the French original. Right. The concept of brutalism comes from architecture. The people that deal with building structures, planning, and all that. And here is a philosopher using a concept from architecture to philosophically engage with the present condition of the world. And then the book is couched in some prose which is novelistic. Already we are thinking about 3 provinces of rendition: architecture, philosophy, and the way novels are written. That ability, that performance to disrespect disciplinary fences, disciplinary boundaries, is what Mbembe has been able to do. Mbembe's book, which I think became a classic, is on the post-colony. That book achieved many things, especially the essay itself, Provisional Notes on the Post-Colony. And one of the achievements it had was to be the most stolen book from libraries. The book that got to be the most stolen book from libraries. That tells you something, that it is coveted, that it is interesting, and all that. Then there's a very big problem with classics. Works that become classics are a problem. The first problem being that they are murderers. They tend to kill other works. Like if someone says Edward Said, everyone says Orientalism. Yet Edward Said's best work is on the question of Palestine, not Orientalism. If you talk about Thabo Mbeki, everyone says, I am an African. That's not Mbeki's best speech. If you talk about Mbembe, everyone says, on the post-colony. That's not Mbembe's punchiest account. There's still more in the archive, in the desk of Achille Mbembe. Right, Prof, one day I'm going to introduce you. Today I just thought I should flag the problematics of the very idea of introducing you. The platform is yours. Let's carry on. Professor Mbembe's account today is Necropolitics Revisited, which is a revisitation of a famous essay that most of us are familiar with already. Prof, please come around, let's have a conversation. Yeah. I will ask you to sign again this copy. I'll tell you a tragic story. Prof signed a copy of my copy of his book before. Then I was invited by the University of Zululand to have a conversation. Some very unwise people pointed a gun at me, took the car, and some of my possessions, including the copy. So I had to go and buy another copy. Prof, you have the task to sign another copy again. So, thank you so much. Yeah. We have 40 minutes for Prof's talk, then 15 minutes of Q&A and all that. My colleague Kacha is going to assist me with time. Prof, let's do it again.
Okay, I would like to thank Nikki and her center, as well as, of course, William, whom I always have a huge pleasure listening to William, including when he's editing me, as he himself said. Of course, I will sign the copy of your book. As William intimated, I thought for this very important symposium, it might be fit to revisit a concept I used in an article that was published many years ago in the journal called Public Culture, and in an article, the title of which was very simply Necropolitics. So I first used that term in that journal article, and the article itself was written in the immediate aftermath of the Second Iraq War, when the notion of war on terror was initiated in particular by the United States of America. The notion of war on terror, which is very different from a war, I mean one conducts against competing rival states' enemies. The idea of the war on terror, there was something specific in it, in the sense that it was a preemptive war you conducted before the enemy has declared its intentions. It was also an endless war in the sense that, of course, it had a beginning, but nobody knew exactly when it would end. So to some extent, it was a permanent war. And in the article called Necropolitics, I was trying to raise questions about the relationship between democracy and sovereignty, because sovereignty was in those years a big theme of discussion. So democracy and sovereignty, and in particular democracy and what are called the work of death. And the work of death, it's a notion I borrowed from a French thinker whose name is Georges Bataille. So I was trying to reflect on that relationship between what democracy has to do, not necessarily with freedom, of course it has something to do with freedom, but what is the relationship that democracy establishes with death as such within worlds characterized by the ever-present shadow of racism. So I was bringing together all these concepts. I was trying to tie them up around this idea of necropolitics. And I have to say that Palestine, not Gaza in particular, but Palestine was the center of gravity of this piece. When you read it today, the last section of it's a very long piece, the last section is dedicated to the situation in Palestine. In a section on Palestine, I refer to works done by Palestinians themselves and to Israeli progressive scholars, in particular Eyal Weizman, who then had published a very important book, as well as many others. A key conclusion of my inquiry, because it was really an inquiry into history of ideas, a key conclusion was that the subjugation of life to the power of death, or necropolitics, is a cornerstone of sovereign power. That was, I mean, I could have written the whole article in one sentence. That would have been it. And we wouldn't have to go through the 40 or 50 pages of elaboration. That was the idea. Now, of course, before coining the term necropolitics and necropower, I used the two terms in the article, I had been reading Michel Foucault, and in those years I was also very much immersed in the writings of other Western theorists. I mentioned Georges Bataille, who himself was a reader of Hegel, or Carl Schmitt, and in fact, the two terms, necropolitics and necropower, build on Foucault's work on something he called biopolitics and biopower, to which I should add, of course, Agamben, who then had written a very important piece on the state of exception. So that was the constellation, and you're always right, you are in conversation with multiple interlocutors. These were my interlocutors. Now, in order to give you a proper sense of what I meant by necropolitics and to what extent it might have something to do with what Nikki and William are asking us to think about in the next few days, maybe I should say something about Foucault's concept of biopolitics. Foucault's argument went something like this. And of course, Foucault is talking about the Western experience. He's not talking about any other experience. His argument goes something like this. Until the 18th century, power, he's very interested in questions of power, was negatively defined by the sovereign right to kill or to allow to live. So you kill or you let live. And that was the way in which power was negatively defined by what it could do or couldn't do. If you want, power, he says, was driven by a let live, make die model. That was the paradigm according to him. And he goes on then to argue that around the 18th century, however, a new form of power became influential in the West. Power over life, which he calls then biopower. And according to him, this era of biopower functioned instead as a make-live, let-die model. So we move from one paradigm to another. And this big shift from a disciplinary mode of power to a biopolitical mode of power. And the era of biopower, according to Foucault, represented a more direct control over and appropriation of life. And during this era, the nature of politics, he argues, changed to become more concerned with the administration and government over life as such. And this is what he called biopolitics. That is a form of power which included but could not be reduced to disciplinary power. He don't have the time to go through all of this. I will just give you these snippets briefly. So I was then picking up on Foucault's work, which itself had been the subject of critique, by a number of authors. Don't have the time to go through them all. Anyway, picking up on his work, Foucault's critics and commentators of Foucault then went on to distinguish between affirmative and negative biopolitics. So they used his intuitions to try to go a bit deeper into what he meant by biopolitics. And they ended up showing, of course, how a heterogeneous collection of biopolitical practices were mobilized, in fact, through what they call biopolitics multiple. All of these are very complicated arguments. I won't bother you with them. Now, so of course, I try to go through what Foucault's commentators were saying about biopolitics. But whatever the case, at the time when I published Necropolitics, what is called in the literature negative biopolitics was mostly linked to the work of Agamben. I don't know how many of you know of these names. Anyway, after the conference, you just Google them, and then it'll give you some idea of what we are talking about. Agamben is an Italian scholar, very well known throughout the world, and when I was writing, he was very influential. He's still extremely influential. So, Agamben, in fact, when he wrote on the state of exception, what he did is that he used the example of the Holocaust. He considered the space of the camp as the paradigmatic site of what he called bare life. And for him, the camp inhabitants, he calls them, I'm not sure that they are inhabitants in the classical sense of the term, but these are his notions. The camp inhabitants, he argues, were divested of their political status and exposed to the violence and power of the sovereign, with bare life becoming the existence which is suffered by the abject and the discarded, or, as he puts it, the living dead. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that there is, at the time I write Necropolitics, philosophical and theoretical debate on the idea of death, the concept of death, in its relationship, or in, I mean, when I say death, it's a bit passive, act of killing, of taking life, in its relationship to, on the one hand, democracy. What is the place of death in democracy? What place is it that democracy grants to the act of taking life? Not only in war, where you go and kill an enemy, and in trying to kill an enemy, you expose your own life because you might be killed by the enemy. So that transaction, which is somewhat sacrificial, of which Hegel talks about a lot, in particular in his dialectics of the master and the slave, but that's too complicated for this morning. So you have a lot of debates going on that. Death and democracy, death and sovereignty. Sovereignty as the ultimate manifestation precisely of that power to give death, as Derrida puts it later on, giving death in his short book. So I won't bother you too much with Agamben. You can Google him. So I tried to develop the concept of necropolitics in what you mentioned, Said, what Said would call a contrapuntal response to both Foucault and Agamben. The piece is really debating with Foucault and Agamben. And in my mind, necropolitics was supposed to function simultaneously as a geographical, as a political, and a theoretical intervention. That was the attempt to re-specialize. Biopower was not meant to move away from the paradigm of the camps, of the prisons, asylums of European metropoles. It was supposed to take into account the other side of that paradigm. It's, if you want, it's house of mirrors. That is the horrors of European colonies, which are an integral part of the history of the West. It's not as if the history of the colonies was a part in the apartheid sense, that which is separated, not at all. It is an integral part of the history of the West. And I was trying then to foreground race as a primary marker of subjectification in modernity. So, to summarize it all, Foucault's biopolitics, of course, invokes normative theories of democracy, concept of reason, to suggest that sovereignty is expressed through norms created by a polis, political community, putatively free and equal subjects, and it underpins Western modernity. If you read Habermas, that's what Habermas, for instance, argues. All rational, everything is a matter of communication, communicative reason, dialogue in a public sphere, etc. And that's how sovereignty is exercised. That's the normative definition of sovereignty. What I was trying to argue is that necropolitical sovereignty rests, in fact, on the power to define who matters and who does not, and the necropolitical sovereign, who is part of the history of the West. In the West itself and outside of the West, this necropolitical sovereign is thus concerned with the destruction of humans and the creation of docile subjects through a spectacle of pain, as Sontag would put it. Anyway, the article was published, as I was saying, I think in 2005, and a few years later, it began to be picked up by a number of commentators and scholars. It began serving as the theoretical framing for numerous empirically detailed studies. By 2015, 2018, and especially in the aftermath of COVID-19, the concept became, let's say, an animating concept in a number of studies within various disciplinary fields, including in particular in the field of political geography, but not alone. There's a very interesting piece that has been published indeed in July in Progress in Human Geography, which gives a really exhaustive account of the ways in which the concept has traveled, if you want, in particular in the discipline of geography. But the same kind of study could be done in many other areas. To the point where today, I mean, you have new terms that have been added to the term necropolitics. I'll just give you a few so as to entertain you. So for instance, you have necroburbia. You have, that's Ortega, necro-ontology, Nigerian called Uzendu, necrolocators, necro-regimes, necro-settlements, necro-urbanity, necro-mobilities, necro-settlers, necro-capitalism, necrography. It goes on and on and on and on. I'm not one who likes reading. The moment I write, I don't read myself. And nor do I really like reading comments on my work, let alone answering what people do with it. But this is what has happened to the concept. It's pretty embarrassing, I have to tell you, because it presents analytical dangers. If everything counts as necropolitical, then what can it actually tell us? But these are rather questions I should deal with myself. Now, for the remaining amount of time, I will just try to keep that concept in the background and say a few things about some of the key dilemmas of our present, our global present, which is a common present, although we live in different places with different histories. Concerning the current epoch and our current predicament, it seems to me important to foreground one key event if we have to say something meaningful about extremist mythologies. That key event, I would argue, is the upsurge, almost worldwide, in the use of the word existential, or to be more precise, of the term existential risk. And in fact, entire fields have emerged which, through a mix of utilitarian ethics, statistical risk analysis, and even transhuman advocacy, fields which are devoted to examining the extent to which we are at a tipping point and whole realms of existence are at risk of being irrevocably changed, destroyed, or extinguished. So exhaustion and extinction are unquestionably on the horizon, accompanied by a pervasive apocalyptic sentiment. So the apocalyptic is back, it is with us. And there are a number of indicators which animate this apocalyptic sentiment, threats to human existence including, of course, ecological calamities, nuclear weapons. They have never really been that far away. Viral pandemics, we just emerged out of one a few years ago. Disastrous biotechnologies. I don't even mention extraterrestrial threats from asteroids to aliens, super intelligent computers, all things rendering or likely to render humans displaceable and disposable. Of course, all of this nourishes therefore the feeling that we, humanity, but also non-humans, we are at a turning point. So it seems to me that in order to develop deep reflection on extremist mythologies, one way to do it is to enter through this term existential. And if the term existential is back, it is, as the second remark I want to make, it is nevertheless divested from its original philosophical meanings. I won't go here into what those original meanings are. I'll just mention a few features. At the core, as you know, of existential thought, when you read especially the likes of, Sartre, for instance, but before him there are a number of others, and after him there are many others. At the core of existential thought, in all its varieties, we do find a deep anxiety and preoccupation with mortality. The question of death, of giving death, the question of killing, the question of weapons. A deep anxiety, preoccupation with mortality, in the sense that existential thought is deeply preoccupied with how to process what Heidegger used to call the subject's being toward death. That in fact, who are we in fact? We are, the French term is le passant. We are but passers-by. It's like a river, and you take a Limpopo or the Nile, it flows in one direction, unidirectional, towards its end point is death. So we are subjects, if you want, being towards death. And as we know, Heidegger contributed immensely to the elaboration of a philosophy of the subject that was pretty original, if only because it provided the basis of an inquiry into how humans engage meaningfully with death, beginning with their own death. So, you see, a return to existentialism, but divested from, indeed, these deeper meanings, which other philosophers dealt with, Schelling, Descartes, Kant, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche himself. The list is extremely long. And existentialism as a philosophy taught us that existence is always, in fact, embedded in a real-world situation. that is not created solipsistically by a subject disconnected from any context, is not created by reason, totally decontextualized. It is created in the interaction we have with others, in embodied life experience. So the kind of attention to existential risk we see today is somewhat divorced from that embodied life experience. Let me, because I only have 5 minutes left, let me mention another key issue, which it seems to me where indeed this question of mortality, of killing, this question of giving death has, of course, of late found its cataclysmic expression. It's in Gaza, and I will end with Gaza. I will just telegraphically signal a few things Gaza has taught us, or we have seen going on in Gaza. We have seen, for instance, machines, tools, technical objects that can rapidly process massive amounts of data to generate thousands of potential targets for military strikes. Those of you who have looked at some of the images of Gaza recently, you see total devastation. Total devastation through bombing, aerial bombing. You have seen the targeting of many civilians, in particular women and young people. Of course, Hamas leaders and all that. I just want to highlight the importance of technology in the production of this Dantesque space Gaza has become. The instantiation of necropolitical power in its capacity to raise to the ground everything and almost everyone. So, what has, at least for me, has been absolutely mind-boggling, striking for the mind, the fact that you have tracking softwares which locate the targets in what used to be their homes. The next stage, of course, is picking the munition in which to bomb them. Hefty percentage of the munitions we now understand are so-called dumb bombs, which are known to cause more collateral damage than guided bombs, all in the interest of saving more expensive armaments. The more they cost, the more you want to save them, and the more you are enticed to use cheaper ones, which cause as much damage as possible. So you end up then with entire residential blocks turned to mountains of rubble and deep pits. I was reading a piece 2 days ago, 60 million tons of rubble, which will have, now that there's a semblance of ceasefire, which will have to be, of course, cleaned up, put exactly where nobody knows, without counting, of course, the chemical pollution which bombs have caused, which make the whole place, in fact, I would say, uninhabitable. So you have all of that, thousands of people buried under the ruins of their homes or as they fly away from danger. So yesterday Gaza was an open air prison. Today it's a place of devastation and desolation and truly unimaginable destruction. Last point, this is the place that some want to turn into a Riviera, strictly speaking, fantasy of escape. A Riviera is a place of hedonism and excess, and of course this hopefully for those who are envisaging this type of evolution, of turning it into a land of casinos, of naked, brazen hypercapitalism, this can only be done, in fact, through a war crime, through the expulsion of millions of people out to either Egypt, Jordan, and brazen ethnic cleansing act, etc. So, this project of extermination and settlement is precisely what Patrick Wolf wrote about in his famous piece on settler colonialism and the logic of what he called eliminationism. And I would like to suggest that we reread, indeed, Patrick Wolf, Settler Colonialism and the Logic of Eliminationism, which in this specific case of Gaza implies that first you turn Gaza into a wasteland within more or less total indifference to justice, and then you evict and redevelop, and you place one's confidence in brute force rather than in alliances, trust, or moral leadership. It is this shift to, or return if you want to brute force, which seems to me to be the core of the necropolitical. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, colleagues. Just as I promised you, you've been saved. This is Prof Mbembe, a walking library. Informative, provoking, and all the associated triggers of thought. Prof, as you were speaking, something crossed my mind, which is just the corpus of concepts that you have contributed to the vocabulary of academia. The team at WiCDS, Masters and Honors, will testify to that in our search for keywords in critical theory. How many concepts have been harvested from the desk of Prof Mbembe? Not just necropolitics, but a lot other, planetarity, the serality, and a lot other concepts that have helped us to have a handle trying to understand what is happening around us. And as we are speaking again, the correspondence between Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud, is it 1932, 1933, about why war? Because Einstein, who contributed to the generation of the nuclear, the atomic bomb, got worried about why human beings were teetering towards their destruction and the destruction of the world. So he thought a psychologist could help and wrote a letter to Sigmund Freud to say, but why war? Why are people fighting? Why extremism? Why will to power? And why is there this temptation to say, can one destroy the other, and why not, and all that? So all these are things that come up when we engage with realities, like Gaza. I thought you were going to talk about your essay on the society of enmity, which got you into a lot of trouble, but it projected what is happening now. And that's like 5 to 6 or 7 years earlier than what is happening now. But
it was a joke.
You wrote about it.
I mean, when we look into what's going on, what is happening,
Microphone.
Society of Enmity is a chapter in the book called Necropolitics. It appeared in Philosophy Journal.
Yeah.
I can't remember the title of the journal. And it landed me into trouble indeed in Germany, where I was accused of being an anti-Semite, which is really interesting, because you have anti-Semites and anti-Semites, but the moment you have a black man who is an anti-Semite, you really have, the real metaphor. It comes up when you put together the two concepts. So in a place like Germany, with its history, the only country on earth which was complicit of 2 genocides in the same century, and which today pretends to lecture the whole world about morality. But that's something else. So the description, they took 2 or 3 sentences where I was saying that in fact there is no comparison between apartheid and what's going on in Palestine. Most people believe that there is space to make the comparison. And I was arguing that it is no, apartheid was totally primitive instrument. When you look into the high-tech nature of domination of the occupied territories, there's no comparison. So they accuse me of comparing the Holocaust with apartheid, which is, of course, in Germany a capital sin. But what is described either in Necropolitics or in the Society of Enmity is then you see what has been going on over the last 2 years. I mean, the magnitude of what has been going on doesn't really warrant a response to German, how should I call it, without being nasty. You put a word into it.
Thank you so much, Prof. Yeah, we've got 10 minutes, Nyana, for Q&A with Prof. So can I see hands? Someone that wants to comment or ask a question to Prof. I can see Dr. Banyoro, my colleague, and the other one. Prof, if you may just take note of the questions as they come, then we'll address all of them at once. Sorry.
Molweni igama lam ndingubuntu Maketama. I am an African Lit student. Thank you very much, Prof. This was indeed very insightful, and also I think for my studies as well, it's something that I'm looking to consider. However, there's a thought that sits with me right now, and I'm hoping to reconcile it with you. So, in your rendition about necropolitics, and I'm looking at the association of life and death, and who gets to give life over death. But I'm also thinking about the lived experience of black people, that they always found themselves on the other side of on the side of death more than they find themselves on the side of life. And that on its own, for me, I'm thinking about how, even when you think about the ideas of prejudice, you can hardly say that the lived experience of black people in terms of prejudice is exactly comparable to other forms of prejudice. So when you look at black lives, for example, there's always an element of being commodity, being sold, being, disposable, expendable, exchanged. And without, so I'm also thinking about the horrific events that are happening in Palestine and Congo, for example. And even though these are horrific events, but there's an element of, there's a lens in which I'm trying to think of this without qualifying which one is better, which one is the worst. That when you look at Palestine, it seems more like a prejudice, and about space and who gets to occupy what. And then when you look at Congo, you get child labor, you get extraction, you get all forms of exploitation that commodifies the black body. So with the necropolitics, I don't know if there's space to accommodate black lived experiences or not, and maybe you can, that you can reconcile those thoughts for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jock.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the excellent presentation. I'm probably more ignorant around this line of questioning, but I wanted to find out how you would probably lend your ideas in the current developments in the United States, with thinking about the left and right politics and the recent murder of Charlie Kirk, and sort of this attribution of the right to take life and the right, sort of like a evolving, it's sort of like an evolving stereotype of the left as this kind of politics in the world, the right is performing this kind, right? So you have your Trump on a certain extreme, and then you have this person, the accused for in the Charlie Kirk murder, for example. So how would you land your current thoughts around what I maybe consider a middle ground, or the liminal space where there's this contestation for humanity, and this contestation for life, and this contestation for meaning, that the right and the left, to some degree, are involved are engaged in some sort of, maybe in your framing, like metaphorical engagement with, right? Trying to own the space. So in that particular conversation, or regarding the United States, I just wanted to find out what your thoughts are around that, but also how we can how you extend those ideas to think about the way the left and the right is defined globally, and how that's sort of shifting and evolving, or is it? And how does that also speak to your work around the technologies of surveillance in relation to necropolitics? Are we thinking about the right and the left in isolation, or are you seeing this as to some degree a dialectic in the way that you framed it, that there's an ongoing contestation, and in the struggle to find who really is maybe socially just, that this adds another layer of complexity to it. So that's my question to you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jock. There was another colleague right here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian, and mine is going to be brief and simple, Prof. And thanks once again for your beautiful speech and lecture. Mine is on the necropolitics. I don't know if they've written a paper on necro-corruption. Mine will be straightforward on Palestine, comparing it to South Africa. We are being marginalized once again by toxic corruption in South Africa. Hence I'm saying necro corruption. And with regards to the living dead, my question is, are South Africans the living dead because of this toxic corruption, which is a result of necropolitics? And once more, the necro-settlers, once more in South Africa. And then also, what is your take on democracy and sovereignty, comparing it to South Africa and Palestine? Is South Africa a country of the living dead because of this toxic corruption, hence the necro-corruption? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Is there any other hand? Yes, Doc.
Thanks, I don't need a mic, I'm very loud.
I know.
Thank you, just very quickly, I'm curious, in relation to necropolitics, if we're gonna challenge and subvert these discourses and systems, should we reappropriate pro-life as a strategy?
Thank you, Doc.
Necropolitics are quite entangled with questions of sovereignty, and it seems to me that the shape and the direction and logic of sovereignty has shifted a little bit since the war on terror in ways that I find difficult to put my finger on. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. We mentioned moral leadership. I wanted to find out who defines it.
Thank you. Oh, we've got another hand. Sebastian?
Thank you so much, Prof Mbembe, for such a wonderful lecture. I inspired and really learned a lot from many of your teachings. My question is based on, if you could just explain to us, the relationship of necropolitics within this apocalyptic moment and the return of existential threat. What does that look like? And secondly, what's the place of sovereignty in the post-colony within the very same context of this apocalyptic moment? How does sovereignty function? Is it necessary at all, if there is? And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I see any other hand before Prof speaks? I'll tell you a story about Dr. Mark Ewen. I tried and failed to sell them to Al Jazeera as a journalist because of their voice projection. They didn't buy them. Thank you. Prof, can you?
Thank you all for your questions. Some of them are comments, and I take note of the comments. There is a question on black people. I'm sure you are familiar with the Afro-pessimist literature. For which is, of course, there are always many different varieties of Afro-pessimism. But overall, it's a discourse that rests on some key assumptions. One key assumption revolves around the idea of social death, which, as you know, was first developed by Orlando Patterson and then picked up by a number of other thinkers. The idea of social death, as developed by Patterson, relates to the fate of black people in America in particular, during the time of slavery. The thing today is that, the discourse on black people or on blackness is dominated by the American experience. black Americans have managed, if you want, not to monopolize, but to dominate, to exercise a huge hegemony over discourses on what it is to be black, on blackness, and the future of being black in the world. And this reading of what it means to be black and what the space for being black in the world, this has been, if you want, universalized. So that we can be in South Africa, we speak about blacks, but in fact, we are speaking about blacks in America, not blacks in South Africa, without realizing that. We can be in Brazil, we speak about blacks, but with a black American accent. So, if you want, and this is part of what I try to do in a book called Critique of Black Reason, we have to reopen the debate on that sign, the sign of the black, in order to allow for a pluriversal reading of the experience of being black in modernity. And being black in modernity is not exactly the same everywhere. It's certainly not exactly what happened in America. Which doesn't mean that America is an exception, but which helps to historicize these processes and open up a space for a dialogue that would be enriching. So, for instance, in the USA, the blacks arrived in the USA as slaves, majority of them. What is a slave? A slave is, in economic parlance, a commodity. You sell a slave, you buy a slave. A commodity, but a speaking commodity, if you want, because to be a slave doesn't mean you stop exercising the faculty of language, the faculty of inventing symbols, of inventing a religion, praying a god, singing, doing music. Those symbolic capacities are not, they are crippled, but they are not entirely erased for you to become a commodity the way in which Marx defines what a commodity is. So it's a commodity, if you want, of a special type. Which is not the case of a black South African, or of blacks, I don't know, in Senegal or in Cameroon. So, the slave is also a worker, as Du Bois mentions it, says it in his big book, Black Reconstruction, which we should all be reading in all South African universities. That one and many others, which we don't study in our universities here in South Africa, which we should study. A worker of a special kind, because the slave is not paid a salary. The labor of the slave is appropriated almost fully by his or her owner, as opposed to a worker who works in a factory is paid a pittance, but is paid a salary. So, I mentioned Du Bois' Black Reconstruction because the book opens up with this idea of the general strike. I mean, what is a general strike? The general strike is talking about has nothing to do with general strike in Marxist literature, because a strike of slaves. What happens when slaves go on strike? Can we even talk about a strike in that case? So you see, there's a whole philosophical continent which is opened up if we think about these matters differently. Finally, a slave, and maybe that's where some connection with the South African case might be possible, in the sense that the slave is indispensable in that economy between the 15th, 16th century up to the abolition of slavery. The slave is absolutely indispensable. You need the slave to foster economic control of growth of capital, all of that. But the slave is also dispensable. So this dialectics of dispensability and indispensability, that's the crux we have to disentangle. So the same does not necessarily apply to the South African case. From a historical and economic and political point of view, and demographic point of view. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be reading Afro-pessimist literature, but I'm saying that we do have here, as well as in Brazil, as well as in the Caribbean, these are the matrices, modern matrices of racism, of race, and we have to bring all of this material on board to develop a deeper, historically grounded reflection, critical reflection. So, that's for black people, or blackness, call it the way you want. But what strikes me, and that's the argument I make in Critique of Black Reason, is the fact that this question of disposability, replaceability, the fact that we can use people as tools, we can use them as commodities, and at the same time we are able to brutalize them, give them death, destroy their living environments. This tension between giving death or caring for life, that tension nowadays and increasingly in the future will not be the preserve of blacks alone. So we'll see universalizing of the black condition, in the sense that what used to be done exclusively to black people will be done more and more to more than black people. In the planetarization of capitalism that is unfolding, where indeed people and things, the exchange between people and things, transactions going on at that level will become ever more complex. We have to develop a capacity to generalize our thinking on blackness and de-ghettoizing it, if it is to play any role in the search for alternatives for the future. So it's a very complex argument. We'll have to have a whole seminar to go really step by step. I'm just giving you the conclusions, but it's an invitation to do a bit more. Otherwise, for the other questions, look, one thing is clear. I won't talk that much about technology or surveillance because Ryan and Sarah will talk about it this afternoon. But what we are witnessing is the end of liberal internationalism, the international order that was put in place in the aftermath of the Second World War. It's finished. We're seeing its agony. It's coming to an end. And with it, the garments that dressed it up, they are being shed, and the gloves are being taken off. And the way power is, or sovereignty for that matter, is arranged in the world today is mostly transactional, particularly when it comes to trade and warfare and technology. The three going together, trade, warfare, and technology. We are entering a world system in which, it seems to me, we are led to believe that nothing has a history and or any objective sense of right or wrong. And economic coercion can be applied through both military and mercantile might. Just look at the ways in which tariffs are being used right now. A year or so, 2 years ago, it was all about free trade. Now it's all about tariffs. So military and economic coercion are on the agenda. We are witnessing the reduction of politics to how much things cost and what is the return and how things can be maximized. It is as simple as that. A return to a Hobbesian conception of the political, a Schmittian conception of the political, who is my friend, who is my enemy. I already mentioned Gaza. I'm not doing that again. We see also the extent to which any so-called peaceful settlement to conflicts seems to necessarily entail giving the stronger power what it wants. That's what is nowadays called peace or ceasefire. So this emerging regime of accumulation, and I end there, is also, of course, replacing the old logic of production consumption with that of predation. You mentioned corruption. It's a form of predatory behavior, if you ask me. So this is what seems to me to be going on in a context in which leading technology corporations have gained massive power over all of us, not just the political systems. We have all become slaves of those technological corporations. We work for them. The moment we open our computer, the moment we set on our phone, we are set to work for them in harvesting data, in circulating all kinds of signs and symbols, the aim of which is precisely to erase the symbolic and turn almost everything into an objectal matter. Talking about extremism, it seems to me that that's the ultimate extremist mythology. I think I have done my job. I'll wait for my supper tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much. Thanks, Prof. Colleagues, help me to gather 1,000 mouths with which to thank Prof for his contribution today, which we all expected anyway. Right, dystopia, extremism, darkness, and blood. There's something that was said by Chairman Mao. I'm not doing another keynote, Prof has done it, that there's disorder under the heavens. The situation is excellent. So even darknesses, extremisms, dystopia are opportunities for thought. For education, and also activism. Lastly, my favorite philosopher, Hannah Arendt, okay, favorite after Mbembe, by the way, said two things in her book titled The Human Condition. She fleshed out two ideas about vita activa and vita contemplativa, meaning that a life of reflection, like the one that Prof just illustrated in front of us, should be accompanied by a life of activism. To think about things and do nothing about the thoughts is not helpful. So with that, thank you so much, Prof, for this energy and spirit that you have just cast here. This session is closed.